Hello everyone, this is the KingKong LDARC Tiny GT7, featuring 803 9000 kV motors, 1535 props, SP Racing F3 flight controller with a 10 amp ESC, nondescript micro CMOS camera, 25 milliwatt VTX, has a balance lead for your battery connection, comes with this 2-cell 380 milliamp battery, extra props, a USB cable, a receiver manual, the quad manual, some extra screws, some stickers, and a case. It weighs a little over 42 grams. With the battery, it weighs a little over 61.5 grams. It does look to be 75 millimeters. So a few things to cover here. You might not be able to notice in flight, but you will see it if you have it sitting on your bench or something of that nature. But we do have some noise in the VTX, and you can make it out from time to time if you get a little bit of a still picture in order to be able to look at that. I start out a little bit slow, but then I work into it a little bit, and my speed picks up. I gain a little bit more control. No matter how many batteries I fly, I oftentimes start off a little bit slow. But thankfully, I can afford to do that with this one, because with the stock battery, which I am flying this on, I got almost 4 minutes of flight. I'm starting to get things under control now, and we're going to go head down to the basement. And notice that we don't really have any prop wash right there. Now, part of that is throttle management, so that's up to the pilot to make sure you don't bottom out, so you don't want to be coming straight down into your own prop wash. But oftentimes when I do that move, especially with quads like this, are a little bit on the heavy side, is that you get a little bit of that prop wobble, or you get some chop. Maybe you don't see it in the FPV view, but you can definitely hear it with your ears. Navigating the basement just fine. And that's kind of one of the things. This was more difficult to fly like I want to fly in the basement. And if you're comparing it to my other indoor flights, you're probably saying, oh, you're going quite a bit slower. And I am. And part of that is because we don't have any adjustable camera angle, and I didn't modify it to do so. But when we get back to the bench, I'll show you how the camera is just kind of friction held in place by a bracket. So if you did want to modify and get more camera angle, you can do that. It's just going to require maybe some wire snips and some glue of some sort. But once I get things under control, I do feel like you can manage this one inside. Now that's going to depend upon your space and where you're at in your flying journey. If you're just starting out, you'll probably be doing something more like a slow movement forward, just trying to learn your acro. Maybe even you're flying in angle mode, and you're just trying to get the hang of flight. And I think where this one really is positioned well in the market for FPV is someone who has winters like I do, where you can't fly outside all the time, and it's very, very durable, so you crash. And I've got some crash footage that I'm going to show you. It's intentional crash footage. I don't want anybody to think I'm going to always do that. I just think in this case I needed to show how durable it was, because that's really its strongest suit. It doesn't have the power to weight ratio that we've seen in many of the other 2S brushless whoops. And some people are going to say, well, my brushed whoop flies faster than that. And I would agree with you. But this one is very durable. In the next section of flight footage, we will also be taking it outside. But you probably already noticed the odd or different OSD. They call it the Smart OSD. I don't know how smart it is, because it's actually kind of a pain to manage. You cannot manage the OSD via stick movements like you can with a Betaflight OSD. You have to press the VTX button as you're plugging in a battery in order to get into the menu to be able to navigate and select different things. And there's really not that much to select. You can turn certain elements on and off. One of them that I turned off because I find it very distracting is the crosshair and the horizon, those movements in the center of the screen. I really can't fly very well with that. Oh, little crash. Not bad after 3.5 minutes of flight, though. A little proof of concept for turtle mode. It doesn't turtle mode well side to side. It turtle modes better to front to back, or back to front. There we go. We're going to take off again, and we'll finish out this battery. It looks like we have about another 30 seconds or so of flight to do. But the OSD, that's a little bit of a letdown, but for some people that might not be a big deal. Don't get confused by the clock running in the lower right. That is the on time, not the fly time. So this has been turned on for 5+ minutes. As we're bringing it into land, you'll see our voltage recover, clear back to almost 3.6 volts before I cut off the DVR. Obviously, this is our outside flight. I do take it out to take a quick spin. And this does have, I don't show it in this, but I'll show it when we get back to the bench. This does have what has been coined the yaw washout from dives. So if you're coming in from a high dive, you'll find that when you get to the bottom of the dive and you start to pitch up, if you do it like you might with a non-prop guarded machine, that it will pitch up on its own and then yaw one way. Usually I found it yaws to the right pretty hard and pretty dramatically. So if you're looking to do any sort of high-flying acro moves, this isn't the hoop for you, but I suspect you've already got a hoop of your own, or you're waiting for another hoop that's on the horizon. But this one is not going to be a high flyer. You can definitely spend a lot of time flying this outside. On this particular day, we had actually a few nice days. I think it was 51, maybe even 52 degrees. Of course, with just about anything prop guarded, I've got to do some close proximity around the kids' swing set. So we zoom in and out around those things. Our flight time is quite a bit shorter outside, as you might expect, so you'll have to gauge the flight time you'll get out of yours depending upon the batteries you choose to use and how much throttle you're using in flight. Didn't really like my pass through that Y there, so I decided to go again. Oh boy, see how it drops so quickly right there after that roll. Now, one is the pilot didn't do a very good job of getting back on the throttle. That one was a little bit better. But you have to be aware of this, that it doesn't have hardly any float factor. Pretty much when you let off the throttle, it's going to start falling. And that is what makes it not a great quad for doing acro moves. You can do your flips and you can do your rolls, get your timing, and get comfortable with flight, no problem. But as far as doing anything that's going to be more than that, this really isn't the quad for you. And something that I missed, that I thought to mention in the quick roll, but I didn't, is the fact that this has double ball bearings. So for those that want ball bearings in your motors, that should help the motor life, I would think. I have no proof of that, but it always seems like if you have ball bearings, you have less wear on the bushings that you might in other motors. But of course, you're also going to be running at about 50% throttle to hover, so you'll be running on the higher side of the throttle in your flight. After the outside flight, which is just completing here, we're going to go inside and we're going to do some crash testing. I set up a piece of plywood and I park it kind of in the unfinished section of the basement, and we crash into that a few times. And I do have the field cam that will get us a little bit more of a clear view of the impact that it takes. And I don't want to be known as some guy that crashes stuff all the time, because there's a lot of circumstances where I don't think that's appropriate. But in this particular case, I think it's probably one of its strongest suits is its durability, and that's something that we have suffered from a little bit. We've had the beta FPV whoops that tend to suffer a little bit when their canopies are pretty fragile, the Mobula 7 and its fragile frame. Although they have a V2 out, we'll have to see how that develops. What are some of the others? I'm trying to think here. Pretty much we've seen a durability issue on all the 2S brushless whoops in one factor or form or another. Of course, if you fly and it's cold outside, do not expect the plastic to hold up nearly as well. And again, our battery recovers just fine. Let's jump into the FPV crash footage as I go down into the basement and I zoom through the I go as fast as I can, I guess, and still make it through the doorway and through the treadmill and whack into that. I do have battery ejections with the stock battery. That is the most snug fitting of all the batteries I tried. And when we get back to the bench, I'll also talk about the different batteries that I used and some recommendations as to what you might look at. I do think the best fit battery is going to be the same one that the quad comes with, which is the KingKong or LDARC branded 380 milliamp 2S battery that only has a balanced lead. Now let's use the field cam. You may have seen that camera sitting down by the piece of wood I was running into, give you a little bit more of a clear picture of the impact, and I'll play the last one in slow-mo just for fun. So this is the wiring harness that I mentioned. You just plug it into your balance lead like that. You line up the little slots. You plug this into your balance port, this end into your other port in order to be able to enable charging. This is included in the box. I just failed to show it to you in the quick roll. This is the stock battery. We talked about that a little bit. This battery is another one I use quite a bit because it's very similar in size, although this one does outperform this one. This one is probably, I suspect this one is 14 months old, maybe even longer. I have a hard time remembering how long I've had some of these batteries. Part of it got torn off. That is MyLipo. And I think these are pretty tough to get. You might check the MyLipo website at mylipo.us. You can go to .de, but it's, of course, in German. So mylipo.us to see if they have this 2S 350 milliamp battery still around. I think I had to get this from Germany. And when you order from Germany, because MyLipo does properly package and ship their batteries, you have to pay the high prices of hazardous shipping. I believe I ordered like $250 worth of batteries at that time, and I paid like 40 or 50 bucks for shipping. So this battery, while it's as close as they come to the same size, really isn't manageable unless they happen to carry this in the US or in your location. Another battery that fits pretty well, and I'm covering this, hopefully you saw it during the quick roll, is because this battery tray is very specific. Of course, you can modify this if you want to. I'm just showing you this because I think where this quad fits in the market is for people starting out, people that are probably not looking to mod right away. You can see I didn't get the canopy back together very well. I'll have to redo that. So people who get started don't tend to want to jump right in with having to do modifications like snipping this off and then running a battery strap and then, you know, toilet tanking, which is when you put the battery this way is oftentimes called toilet tanking the battery. So I wanted to show you a few batteries that do fit. This one does fit in pretty snug as well. If I can get the label to punch through there. So that's pretty snug. You do have quite a bit of battery lead here that you got to figure out what to do. I ended up using a rubber band and putting it around this end and keeping this out of the way, and then I would plug it in. I would actually put the battery in this way so that I could just plug the balance leads in like this. So this is a China Hobbyline Ministar 2S 450. Also the Beta FPV 350 works just fine, but it is a bit looser. You can see that. So what I would tend to do is I've had some foam laying around. You might have some of that as well. And I would lay that in the bottom. And then I would fish the balance lead through this way. And then I would use the lead as additional tension. Not perfect, but you know, I had battery ejections when I did the crash testing with every battery I tried. So the battery compartment could use some work, I guess, in that regard. Also, the 450 from G&B, I put in pretty much the same way, where I folded this lead down, fished this balance lead through, used the piece of foam. Stay away from the China Hobbyline Ministar 350. This battery, you'll get very short flight times, and you'll get a lot of battery sag right away with this one as well. Some of you might remember I used to be a China Hobbyline team pilot, and that was one of the first things I told the manufacturer was these need some work. They told me they weren't really designed for quads, so fixed wing or cars or something like that, it's not really made for something that needs high output. Also, these are pretty old, but you might see these around and think to use them because they are similar size. This one is actually quite a bit smaller as far as the width around it, the diameter. It's Freebie branded. I wouldn't use this one either because, again, battery sag. It's not a very good battery. It's not going to yield good flight times or flight performance. This one's labeled as Happy Model. And then this one is really close to the same size and does fit in quite snug. But your flight time is about a minute, I think, is my recollection of this one. So I would stay away from that as well. Another battery you can use is the G&B 300. I'll be covering this a little bit more in an upcoming video. Hopefully I can get that out before Christmas. If you're watching this after Christmas, you might be wondering what I'm talking about. It's almost Christmas time. This battery is, obviously it has a little bit different form factor, and also it doesn't fit in quite as snug. So if you're using it, again, the foam and the bending of the battery lead through there keeps it in there pretty well. I didn't use straps, I didn't use Duralock, I didn't use anything else to keep this battery in. And this battery does perform very well for its weight, but this one did yield the longest flight time inside. I did not have the opportunity to fly this one outside yet. So although it looks like a single board stack, you'll see from these pictures the VTX is a separate board and it is secured in the canopy, and you can also see where the camera is secured in, and you can get a little bit of a view in this picture of how it's friction fitted in there. Also, the rear of the canopy does have these pins that plug down into the frame, and the canopy adjoins to the flight controller with a micro JST connector. I believe that's a 1.25 connector. So that's what your internals look like. The motors are not connected via sockets or connectors. They are soldered to the board. You'll see in this picture where we have two motors soldered to the top side of the board and the other two motors are soldered to the bottom side of the board. Another question you might have is, why do I have different colored props? It's because I lost these. And I had checked them before flight, but they tend to vibrate loose. So that's something to note. If you have this machine, I would highly suggest putting some Loctite on the screws and putting them in. Even out of the box new, I would take those out, put some Loctite in, put them back in. Thankfully, they ship extra screws and extra props, so I was able to continue to fly after I did lose those. Actually, in one particular case, I was actually fairly early on, maybe my third battery in. I was about 6 to 8 feet away from me here in the unfinished portion of the basement, and I heard the prop as it crashed fly and ping all over stuff. I didn't find it, so I've got 2 props down here in the basement and 4 screws, and I don't have any idea where they're at, so it's a good thing that we got extras. But do secure those down if you have those. It's got our USB connector here at the front for connecting to Betaflight. It does use Betaflight. You don't have any traditional OSD that you can use for tuning. I did tweak the tune a little bit. It came with a tune, and I'll put my tune on screen. It's not perfect, especially if you want to work on the yaw washout that you get from dives. Some more work would need to be done. I think also, or changing your props to where they spin in towards the sides. Traditionally, our quads spin in towards the nose and in towards the rear. You might be able to see the high side of the prop is here, and this is the low side. So the high side leads the way to creating thrust, and we would swap props and then change our motor direction in Betaflight, and then we'd also change our motor direction using BL Heli for the ESCs. If there is a lot of interest in me showing you that, I can go through a quick tutorial on doing that. However, I do think it's covered quite well by a number of other YouTube channels. So you can just search for BL Heli, prop reversal, or motor direction, or reverse motor direction, and that will turn up at least a half a dozen probably videos that show you how to do that. Of course, with time, things change. Like Betaflight might look a little bit different from one to another. Look for one that has the Betaflight to where if you go to the configuration page on Betaflight, it's got a slider for changing motor direction. That's the one you're looking for in this particular case. Earlier versions of Betaflight, you had to do the motor reversing by a command line. You don't need that. You can just click that slider and then use BL Heli, which is a suite. I believe they're doing away with the Chrome application. At least Google says Chrome is no longer going to allow applications at some point in time. So you'll need to go to the website for BL Heli and download that. Also, this is the button on top to change your channels and frequencies. Typical KingKong fashion, we only have 16 different channels to use, and it uses a series of light sequences to tell you what you're on. What I do is I just scan for it because the light sequences I can barely make out. Also, you may have noticed in the quick roll, my receiver is underneath there. There is a bind button. Hopefully it can show you that. This is the FR Sky version, and the bind button is right there. So you press that down and you go into bind mode. Just follow the manual's instructions. It tells you exactly how to do it. If you're looking at this frame thinking, oh, I'm going to take my Mobula 7 or my Beta 75X parts or whatever 2S Whoop parts and I'm going to put it on this, don't plan to do that, because the mounting holes for the flight controller and or ESCs, whatever your case is non-standard as far as those boards are concerned. You would need to 3D print an adapter one way or another in order to be able to mount those things up. But it is a very hardy and very sturdy frame, and with some of that durability comes some additional weight, which for inside flying does make it a bit more of a challenge in order to arrest that speed, in order to be able to make your corners and not get washed into an object. Like one of the areas that I had a lot of trouble with was when I'd go down the stairs and I'd want to just turn and zoom around. I really had to learn how hard I had to hit the throttle in order to not slide into the wall. Or if I was going at speed and I tried to circle the island on the refrigerator side, of not getting too far wide to where you hit either the refrigerator or the wall as I swung around the finish turn. That's something that you just have to learn that control. Of course, if you're just starting out, you're probably not flying in that manner. You're just trying to get used to the stick movements and what you need to do to keep the machine in the air. And this thing, it does everything that we need it to do. The one thing it doesn't have is a buzzer. You can use the D-Shock commands in order to create a little bit of a tone. Of course, don't leave that tone going for very long. So if you struggle to find it, turn it off for a little while, let everything cool down, hit the tone again to try to clue you into where it's at. Also use your FPV goggles. This wire out here is your antenna for VTX. Some may feel strongly one way or another. You saw what was in the video. I am using the Fat Shark HDO goggles with the rapid fire module. I believe my rapid fire module is running 1.8 as far as the firmware on that goes, and I thought the clarity of the FPV view was pretty good. We got a little bit of noise in there. There's probably not much we can do about that because that's probably stemming from either a lack of shielding between the flight controller board and the VTX, or it's just noise the VTX has in it. But it wasn't very bad. It wasn't a deal breaker for me. It was something, again, when you're doing reviews, you're trying to find things to be critical about, and that's one of the things I found to be critical about. Hopefully it's been apparent as we walked through this quad that when it comes to the flight performance, there are better 2S whoops out there, and I contemplated not reviewing this based upon the specs. When I saw it, I thought this isn't going to perform as well, but I think what this has going for it is that durability. I think we'll be hard-pressed, at least currently we'll be hard-pressed to find another 2S whoop that's going to be as durable as this. Of course, if anything breaks, specifically either one of the two boards in here, the VTX or the flight controller with ESC, we are going to have to purchase replacement boards from vendors that carry KingKong parts. We can't just go buy any old board. We can't get a Crazy Bee board and put it in there. We can't go get a Beta FPV board and put it in there. We're going to have to stick with these parts. But again, I suspect for people who are newer in the hobby, that's going to be the easiest because you can take pictures of the wiring, you can replace your parts, and then use your pictures as reference to put things back together. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, or otherwise, please let me know in that section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.